Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Slattery, Director of Training and Membership Services with the League of Cities and Towns. And welcome to another Workshop Wednesday session. Today, we are happy to welcome our friends from Rhode Island Housing to give us some more information on the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy Renaud. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thanks for everybody who's joining us today. As you know, the Rhode Island General Assembly passed a series of bills in the last session that made changes to land use and planning laws that require many municipalities to update their zoning and ordinances and processes at the local level. So Rhode Island Housing, through our Municipal Technical Assistance Program, worked with Weston and Sampson to develop a set of template documents and other tools that we hope will be useful to municipalities as they work at the local level to implement those changes that were required by the statutes. And we are on the image you're seeing right here is the section of the Municipal Technical Assistance website that's devoted to the template document. Stacy, I wonder if you could drop that into the chat when you have a second, just so folks have the direct link. So in a second, Ashley from Weston and Sampson is going to go through, give you a little bit more of an overview of what some of those template documents are. But before we dive into that, just want to give a couple of reminders and updates. First, with regard to the Municipal Technical Assistance Program, I'm sure folks are aware that we stopped accepting new pre-applications under the program at the end of September. The next deadline that's coming up, just as a reminder for folks, is the full applications. Folks submit their pre-applications, and then once those are approved, they go on to work with the consultants on our full application. Those full applications are due the later of October 13th or 30 days from the time that you received your pre-application approval. Just a reminder for folks, actually we're past that, God, we're already past the 13th. So you're in the stage now of if your pre-application was approved after that, you have that 30-day window. If there's a reason why that's not possible, please reach out to Stacy and ask for an extension. We are giving extensions where needed for folks. But we are trying to get a handle on how much is out there in requests, so we know how much funding may be available for projects that haven't received funding yet. And one other thing I would just like to mention about the template documents, we really appreciate that Weston and Sampson developed these in conjunction with statewide planning and the drafters of the legislation, as well as Rhode Island Housing, and bringing in the voices of the planners. They really do represent consensus documents in terms of the interpretation of the legislation. So we certainly hope that those will be helpful for all of you as you are working to implement them at the local level. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ashley.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. So I'm sharing my screen here of the template document website. We're just going to walk through the website a little bit. Weston and Sampson worked with Kelly Morris, who's also on today, to develop the templates in response to the legislative requirements. Hosts the template documents, and so we'll go through that, and then we'll go into the templates a little bit and talk about, you know, how they're intended to be used, and then we're happy to answer as many questions as you guys have this morning. So this is the main template document website. There's an introductory document here. Each of these have a drop-down menu you can use. This gives you an overview of each of the bills. You can click on these links. It will take you to the actual bill language. There is a summary document here as well that provides an overview of the main changes that were made in each of the bills. There's a legislative language summary table. It's not all encompassing, but what we tried to do here was at least give you places where the language was easy to cut and paste. So things like definitions you'll find in here. Much of the language, from the legislation to the templates needed to be altered slightly, or at least turned into local language as opposed to enabling legislation language. So not all of it certainly is a cut and paste. But this table here tries to give you, the sections where you could just pick this out, drop it into your local regulations and ordinances, but you should also use it in conjunction with the associated template. And then we had we have a section on best practices and examples. Excuse me. We worked with GrowSmart and Housing Works on this component of it, where they did a tremendous amount of research, looking at what's out there, what are examples we could draw from, what are the best practices around not just Rhode Island but the country. So there is a set of best practices and examples here. If you click on these, it'll open in a new tab for you, and you can see we have a table for each of these by topic. Not every single bill topic has best practices, but we did choose the larger sections. So here we've got subdivision, and we've given you links to go to, a summary, a resource summary, and then the best practice and example summary here. So we hope that this becomes useful information for everyone to take a look at as you're working through your regulations and ordinances, giving you some outside information to kind of true things up, touch base, and see what other people are doing. And then we have the actual template documents themselves. There are definitely some things to pay attention to in these documents, and I think the best way to probably go through that is to take a look at one of them. So we can look, and like as with the upper portion of the website, these each have a drop-down menu. You can come to these topic areas and it'll give you everything associated with it. So it'll give you the best practices in here as well. So for land development, we've broken out the templates into a couple of sections. We've got the best practices here for you. There are 2 different checklists that you can use, and then there are 2 flow charts for the land development process. And so we can take a look here. If you look at minor land development, and these are available to you as Word documents. So hopefully that's helpful in using the language to drop into your local regulations, or to move your local language into these templates, either way. But the things to pay attention to in the templates is that the language in red is language that is directly from the enabling legislation. It has been slightly altered to take it from enabling legislation language into local language. If we just did a direct cut and paste, obviously that in a lot of circumstances that wouldn't read correctly at the local level. So that kind of alteration from enabling into local language has been done for you in these templates, but the red text represents things in the enabling legislation that need to go into your local regulations that really don't have any ability to be altered in terms of their intent. That you have to keep this language really pretty much as is to directly reflect the enabling legislation language. And you'll also see there are footnotes in here. Please do you read the footnotes. They're pretty important. We used the footnote approach to draw your attention to specific issues. Most of those are references to the enabling legislation itself or calling out areas in the legislation where, as we were going through these and developing the templates, we recognized that there might be an inconsistency or an incorrect reference, or there's conflicting language to another section somewhere else in the enabling legislation. And we call those out. We tell you in here what the issue is, where the reference is, and really most of the time tell you should check with your solicitor on how to manage an issue like this. So in this one, for instance, we're calling out that there's some language in there that's a bit concerning between a modification and a minor subdivision application, and that you are potentially running into time clock issues, and that you should, check with your solicitor on how to address that situation and remain in compliance with the law. So the footnotes are really important. They should definitely be read, and are an integral part of using these templates properly. The other things that you'll see is language like this. Bracketed text indicates areas where the municipality needs to give some consideration to what they want to do, and that you need to add your own tailored language. So in this case, it's the administrative officer may grant the following waivers. This is where the municipality needs to come in and make a decision on what types of waivers they want to give the administrative officer the ability to grant, and you'd have to list those here. Other bracketed text you'll see here, like this, is the planning board. We know not everybody has a planning board. Some of you have a planning commission, some have a plan commission. That's just to make sure that as you're using this language, you're recognizing that you need to tailor these certain sections or these certain words to your own municipality. Again, you'll see here often the bracketed text will also indicate places where you need to insert a local reference, because you want to send somebody to your own checklist, you need to use your local checklist reference and insert that language here. So it's definitely want to pay attention to the bracketed text. You'll also see sometimes text like this where we've got red text and then you've got sections of black within the red text and then a footnote. This is a situation where we recognized that the wrong or the incorrect permitting authority was not identified, or there was a permitting authority identified here that maybe didn't actually have permitting authority according to another section. So what we did here was we took care of that by adding the black text. It's not in red because it's not in the law. This is definitely a case where you should be contacting and discussing this with your solicitor. Adding this black language is going outside of what the enabling legislation says. But if you don't use the black text, you're either conflicting yourself somewhere else or you're inconsistent with another section of general law. So that's definitely a place where you want to have that conversation with your solicitor so that they can help you make a determination on how to handle a situation like that. And here again, you'll see, here's where you'd need to insert your public hearing notice, using that bracketed text to call your attention to specific places where you need to tailor the language. So we'll go back to the main here. And then we also developed some checklists for minor and major applications. These checklists are designed to be a menu of options. So you will see things in here that are worded similarly. It's not a suggestion that you need to keep all of this language, but really wanted to offer different options based on what we were seeing. So you'll see things like, for instance, things related to maybe stormwater, roadways, wetlands, that the language is worded a couple of different ways. And that's really just, we recognize that these are attempting to, set a baseline for very different conditions in different communities. What's going to work in Warwick won't necessarily work in Gloucester. So we wanted to, provide some options. So it is important in using these checklists that you go through them, look at what's in there, compare them to the checklists that you already have, and make some decisions about what language is most appropriate in your community. And these checklists are designed to be used at every stage of review. You'll notice up at the top, there's some instruction here about how they get used. But these are intended to represent the stages of review for the specific checklist, for the specific stage. So this is a minor application. So this would be a pre-app. This is where they would be filling out the pre-app section. This is preliminary. This is final. And so these checklists, like I said, are designed to be used for the application throughout its life. The grayed out boxes are places where you don't have to submit those items. So for a pre-application here, obviously you don't need to submit certain things. So those boxes are grayed out, indicating that those would only get submitted at the preliminary stage of review. And again, that is a tailored option for you to consider about what gets submitted at what stage of review. But instead of creating a checklist for every single stage, this gives you everything in one place. And also kind of broke these up into boxes where it would make it easier for you to remove and add lines to the text, to the boxes, to the tables if needed. So it's broken into sections of general information, existing conditions, and this gives you the ability to easily take out lines, add lines, and kind of really, change things around as necessary. We also added some area at the bottom of these checklists because we're asking or we're recommending that when an applicant submits an application with a checklist, and as many of you probably have seen as you're going through the legislation, there's a requirement in the law now that the applications that are submitted to you must include a filled out checklist. So the applicant should be filling out this checklist, checking off what they're providing for you. We gave some space here because at the top in the instructions, we recommend that if somebody is going to mark an item as not applicable, that they tell you what that checklist item is. They tell you why it's not applicable so that you have an explanation and you don't have to try to figure it out on your own. We also added a column to the right where we're recommending that you have applicants tell you where these items are located so that when you have large plan sets, it's easier for you to find these things. We know that the burden of review is shifting significantly to the administrative officer. We're hoping that this is a technique that can help the administrative officer, make their review process more efficient so that when you do get large sets of 15 or 20 page plans or 100-page stormwater documents, sorry, they've told you where to find that information, ahead of time. They're the ones putting the application together. They know where it's located. If they tell you where it's located, it should hopefully save the administrative officer time searching through lots and lots of pages of plan sets and documents looking for the information. And I think that kind of covers the checklist part of this. As I said, these are designed to be a menu of options, certainly not all inclusive, but attempting to get everything in there that we thought might be useful for people to go through, compare with what they have, and tailor it to their needs. So those are the checklists. And then we have flow charts for major and minor subdivisions. And this, sorry, I can't turn that off. This, gives you a set of a flow chart to kind of walk through the process for major and minor subdivision and land development. There's also one of these for comprehensive permits and for development plan review. Hopefully, everyone finds these helpful in educating boards and commissions and staff on, how the process has changed. We did use boxes over here to make notes. So please do, read those notes as part of this. And we are in the process of working on some short training videos with Rhode Island Housing. Each of these flow charts will have a training video associated with them where we walk you through the flow chart. And hopefully your boards and commission members and staff as well can listen to those videos. Instead of having to read through everything, we're hoping that, a minute and a half or so video will give you some educational material to pass around and make available. It will be an easy way for people to catch up and get up to speed with where things are. So as I said, they're broken down into categories. This is the land development and subdivision section. We've got one on development plan review here, where we again got best practices, the checklist, the flow chart, and the actual template document itself. We've got one here for unified development review. And this is another thing I want to bring to your attention in the templates is that you'll find at the top here, it'll tell you this is for your development regulations. Several of these will have another section at the bottom that will tell you for insertion into your zoning ordinance. For things like unified development review, development plan review, you need some language in your zoning ordinance to enable the item. So here we're enabling unified development review in the zoning ordinance with these short paragraphs. And then our recommendation is that as much of the language as possible, excuse me, ends up in your land development and subdivision regulations. So the bulk of the language that talks about how unified development review is administered would go into your development regulations, with it just being enabled in your zoning ordinance. So just, as I said, make sure you go all the way to the bottom and check because when a majority of the language is to be in the land development and subdivision regulations, we did put that zoning language at the bottom of each template, calling it out with blue text there. So then we've got one on adaptive reuse. There's the template and a best practice resources available there. On appeals, there is a section for appeals and then some best practices. And then we've got comprehensive permit language. We've got a template, best practices, and a flow chart for a comprehensive permit. the technical review committee, we've got a template language there for insertion, and this is another one where you would see language for both zoning and subdivision. And then we've got zoning language here for modifications, variances, and special uses. And we've got some best practices on zoning. And then we've got inclusionary zoning here with a template, and then we've got best practices on inclusionary zoning. I think that provides a overview of how everything is organized, how we would like you to use these templates, that, you know, the intent and how they were designed. They are definitely meant to be used as a baseline for you to start your regulatory review. We hope that you know, find them useful to get you going. You know, obviously still need to find how these fit in to your local regulation and ordinance in terms of how that's set up. Everybody's are organized differently, as we know. And so it's, you know, usually not going to be just the ability to drop these in as they're written, but hopefully gives you the language to use where you figure out how you're going to organize these sections and move them into your regulations. And the templates really should be used in consultation with your local solicitors for tailoring and insertion. You know, again, your solicitor is going to be important in helping determine how these sections get inserted, where they get inserted, how things are going to get, you know, renumbered if needed. So we definitely, you know, highly recommend using these in consultation with your solicitor. I think that covers everything. I don't know, Amy or Stacy, if you have anything to add, but we could open it up to questions if everyone's all set.
That was great. I'm happy to open it to questions.
So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so I can see again.
And just so folks know, they you do have the ability to just you can use the raise hand function or just take yourself off of mute. Maybe show us your face when you're asking a question. If you have a camera, that'd be great. No questions?
You did a really good job of explaining, Ashley.
Oh,
I was going to say, I feel like there, oh, Karen, thank you. I was going to say, I feel like there's got to be one question out there.
Well, this one's less a question about the templates, Ashley, and just a general question. Have you found at the league if there's any appetite for extending the January 1st deadline? Even with these templates that came out, they're incredibly helpful. Thank you, Ashley. What a great job you did organizing them, and they're super clear. But to be able to meet the advertising to get this stuff done, you're looking at having drafts of all this stuff within 2 weeks, and that just seems like a heavy lift for most municipalities with limited staff. So I'm just wondering if anyone has had any conversations or has heard any talk about potentially pushing that January 1st deadline out 60 days, 30 days, to be able to use these templates the way they're meant to be used, which is to customize them, think it through a little, and then make the changes.
I'm sorry, were you asking if we've talked about that at the league?
Yeah.
Okay, that is not something that we have talked about, but we certainly could. Jordan is not on this call at the moment, but
I don't want to speak for Jordan or the league, but I believe that the league did send a letter to the speaker and the Senate president asking for that specifically. I do not know completely what the response has been, but I do know that the league did did ask.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
I may weigh in a little bit on this, I think you have to assume that even if the legislature wants to extend, it's not going to happen it's not going to be effective on January 1st. So you really have to look at the most important sections of your ordinances and regulations and get those done. What I've told my cities and towns that I'm helping is that I'm trying to get advertising out of the way. So even if the documents aren't ready, we're already advertising so that at least you have that under your belt, and then you can continue the matter on the record to a date certain so that you've got your advertising done. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, and to Kelly's point, there are definitely things that are of higher importance than others, where if you're left with nothing at the local level, then you have a concerning situation. And I'll use, somebody just threw in the chat about special use permits. I would say that, you know, it's important that the special use permits get taken care of, because if you don't have specific and objective criteria for special use permits, then you have permitted uses for your special use permits. So that's definitely something that would be of high importance to address. If you don't get your definitions changed, or you don't get your appeal processes changed, or you know, you don't change the standards in your zoning ordinance for the decision on a variance, and you default to state law, it doesn't, there's little or no consequence really to those issues happening and you defaulting to state law. So I do think that there's a way to triage these and to focus on those that are more important and leave some of them to default to state law and just circle back, you know, after January. You have to go through the process twice. You have to do what you have to do. But, you know, I do think that there's an opportunity to do that, which could save you some time. And that's certainly something that I've been recommending to the communities that we're working with. We have come up with a triage approach. We are leaving some of this until January, and we'll come back and we'll play cleanup. But if you default to state law, it's not, there's no consequence there. And somebody did put in the chat again about special use permits. There is a template on special use permits. And what we did there was try to give you some specific and objective criteria for the most common special use permits. It is not going to be all encompassing and all inclusive. You know, I'm working in a couple of places on this language, and I've got places where I've got 100 different special use permits. We didn't give you specific and objective criteria for 100 special use permits. There just would have been no way to find all of them and give you that. But what we did do is give you the most common. Hopefully there's enough in there that you can apply to the ones that you do have, which you probably have most of the ones that are in there, and then, you know, use what's in there to build other specific and objective criteria for the special use permits that are not included in the template.
And Ashley, I would also suggest that you really take a close look at those that are currently special use permits, where they probably either should be permitted in the district or they should be prohibited. You can always change your zoning ordinance if something comes up later where somebody needs a particular use. So take a hard look at those special use permits.
Yeah, I would emphasize that as well. There's no point in developing specific and objective criteria for special use permits that, you know, you could potentially turn to a permitted use. Jen, do you want me to just call on hands I see raised, or?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, Mike, I think you were up first.
Hi, thanks, Ashley. I just want to respond to the comment that Kelly made, and I actually ask a question of Kelly, if you could come back on. Kelly,
Hi, Mike.
how you doing?
Good.
You said that to get advertising in the newspapers, even if you don't have the language ready, and my understanding is that we're supposed to have the advertising complete and ready for the newspaper advertisement, and that it should be submitted in its complete form for the first advertisement, and then could be for second and third advertisement could be abbreviated. How do you get over that hurdle?
So I would highly suggest you talk with your own solicitor, because in each community, ordinances are presented in different manners. Sometimes there's a first read. In that case, the ordinance may have to be in its proposed form. In the communities I'm dealing with, I don't have to do that. You should certainly talk with your solicitor, but that is one way of approaching it. Each community is definitely going to have a different way of adopting, reviewing ordinances. So,
but I believe the enabling law tells us we have to put the advertisement in the text of an ordinance in the newspaper in its totality. I believe the state tells us that.
No, you can summarize it. Take a look at, I just did this for a couple of communities. You can summarize it. So essentially my summaries are to address recent housing legislation. It's as simple as that. But again, I'm not giving legal advice here. Talk to your solicitor, but that's the way I'm approaching it.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I see that there is a question in the chat. A couple, let's see here.
Bill also had his hand up, but I think it went down. Bill, are you all set?
I'm all set. Actually, Mike had my sorry, Mike had the same question as Mike. I know particularly we're going to have to be pretty detailed in our advertisement, and looking at advertising, that seems to be the time constraint that is for at least local communities that is most important. So without that specific strikeout and underline, I had the same question that Mike did, and obviously we got the answer. We'll take a look at it with legal counsel, but I think there needs to be a little bit more detailed in the summary. But I'm hopefully I'm wrong on this. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, I did see, let's see here.
Yeah, there's a couple of chat questions.
Mike Steers asks, is this information only available online, or is there any thought of publishing a resource document?
This is really an online resource, and the reason we thought it was most helpful as an online resource is, as Ashley alluded to, it's designed to really be able to be tailored electronically to your local needs. However, the individual pieces can be, printed, downloaded, printed. The flow charts in particular, the bill summary overviews, things like that can certainly be printed individually and used as part of presentations to local officials and everything. But the thinking in terms of having the electronic document really was to make sure that we wanted it out quickly, as quickly as possible, but also to make sure that it was tailorable by the individual municipalities to their local needs.
Great. And then we have a question from Al Rinaldi. Can you explain how a municipality is to apply the required number of units per acre? How does this requirement relate to the underlying zoning district? He says, I do not recall what section this is presented in.
Al, can you give me a little more context? Because there's a couple of required number of units per acre sections, so I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
I wish I could. I have a lot of regulations floating in my head right now, but there was if I recall correctly, graduated number of units per acre as a bonus.
So that would have probably been in the comprehensive permit legislation.
Possibly.
So as we know, that doesn't relate to the underlying zoning in a comp permit. their underlying zoning.
It just goes away.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's used, the only place it comes into place is when when you want to say what the percentage of density bonus we gave you is. But it doesn't really matter anymore because, as you said, they gave you a graduated density bonus structure in the comprehensive permit.
So it's not really a bonus. It's here's what you're going to get for.
It is being called a subsidy. So it counts as the municipal subsidy, but it's prescribed as to what it is.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and it looks like unless we have other hands to be raised, that was all the questions in the chat. Oh, Bill is back.
And so is Mike.
And Mike.
You guys have the same question again?
Right. Thank you for all your work, Ashley, and the whole team. Great job. I just had one more question. Uses not otherwise listed in a use table. Structurally, many towns, including here, if it's not in the use table, it's not allowed. Could you kind of talk about, strategies to take a look at that provision? Can we run them through like a major land development and a special use permit? I'd like to hear about some strategies on how to address that piece of the legislation, that the statute, I should say now.
So the way that section reads, it's if a use is not listed in the use table, you have to have a process. So somebody has to be able to either go to your zoning official or your zoning board and say, I'd like, this use is not listed. And that individual or board is supposed to look through your existing use table and determine if there is a use that's listed that is similar in type and character that it could be classified under, that requires a special use permit. And then that use that's not listed could be considered to be required to get a special use permit, as the use that is listed is also required to do. It doesn't mean that they have to find a use. It doesn't mean that the use that they do find may not, that use may be prohibited. But you have to have some kind of process where, like you said, it used to be if it's not listed, it's prohibited, and that's not the case anymore. So it may be important for communities to look at that list of prohibited uses and make sure that that's an inclusive list that has everything in it that you want to have in it, because you can no longer rely on, if it's not listed, it's not permitted, because that's not necessarily the case anymore. It doesn't mean that it's automatically permitted or that it automatically gets a special use permit, but you have to have some kind of review and analysis where either the zoning board or the zoning official makes a determination whether or not there's something in your use table that's close enough that they can characterize it under that similar use.
Okay, great. But as a follow-up, so does the statute limit that process? So could I say that before a zoning official determines whether or not this use, say a battery farm that's not in our actual use code, is more similar to one of the other uses and could be considered on a special use permit, could I actually define a process where they have to go to a planning board first, get a recommendation, and the zoning board could give the zoning officer could give a recommendation to the zoning board? What is the limit to determine how that process works? Is there a limit by statute?
So I'll say that what I summarized is what is in the law. If you're going beyond that, you definitely want to do that with your solicitor. I don't think there's anything in there that says that, obviously if somebody's coming to you with some kind of commercial type development, you're going to want to capture that as part of a land development review process, whether that's DPR or minor or major land development. And I don't think you're prohibited from doing that. But definitely I would say that's that's a solicitor question as to like how far you can go. And, this is a conversation that I've had in a couple of municipalities that, I'm aware of some of what's going on out there, certainly not everything. But I think we're running the range from, we're going to stick with exactly what the legislation says, and we're just going to basically insert whatever the legislation says, all the way up to, I think we can do this differently. And it's up to your solicitor what the comfort level is with stepping outside of the bounds of what is prescribed in the law. And only, your solicitor can give you guidance on that.
Thank you, Ash.
Mike, you're up.
Hey there. I think what Al was getting at, Al, correct me if I'm wrong, was the formula in related to inclusionary zoning. Looking at H6058 as approved, there were two things important in that. One was, importantly, that the standard was bumped up from a 10% requirement to 25%. And I think most of us feel good about that and are supportive of that. I am, certainly. But then later on, it says, for developments that are subject to inclusionary zoning, we're going to read it. The municipality shall allow the addition of 2 market rate units for each affordable unit provided. I tried to run the numbers, and my interpretation might be wrong. I was using an example of a 60,000 square foot lot in a 10,000 R10 zone. So presumably 6 lots. 25% doesn't work perfectly in that, but that's why I did it. So you'd need 2 LMI units. And then if you were to add 2 more LMI units for every 2 more market rate units for every LMI unit, you don't get up to 25% until you hit 24 units, unless my calculations are wrong. You're nodding
I
your
don't
head.
think you're wrong.
So now we're looking at, taking an R10 zone and allowing houses on 2,500 square foot lots. We're also looking at quadrupling the impact on water and sewer utilities. To me, that's untenable, or can be untenable. It might not be untenable everywhere, but it can be untenable. And I would like to know how we can resolve that. Do you have any words of wisdom, Ashley, or anybody else?
From the first day I saw that language, I said exactly what you said. These numbers don't work. I think the way to resolve that is to amend the legislation. I don't think you can do it. It's very clear. It is 2 for 1. There is no way around that. That's what it is. If that's untenable, then you don't have it until it gets fixed.
So now we have to face the potential of putting this, this unusable formula into our ordinances, or, if I'm correct, inclusionary zoning is not mandated.
It's optional.
So we could just eliminate it and avoid that problem altogether.
If it's something that the community feels is not suitable, and it is, like I said, it is what it is. We know that inclusionary zoning used to let you create your own kind of staggered approach in terms of what you got for what you gave, for what they gave. That's no longer the case, and it is prescribed. And it's true that may not work in some places. One idea that I have floated, although unfortunately we don't have the time to do it, but you could always do it after the fact, is there's nothing that says that if you have inclusionary zoning that you can't prescribe where it happens. So maybe inclusionary zoning is on a zone by zone basis. Maybe it's not town-wide because in some locations that kind of density is not appropriate. To do that analysis, you need some time to figure out, do the math that you're doing. decide what kind of numbers you come up with and where that kind of density would be appropriate. And then you apply inclusionary zoning in a zone by zone, or maybe you create an inclusionary zoning overlay and it's not a zone by zone, but it's wherever it makes sense. Maybe it's where you have sewer and water. Maybe it's where, you can handle that kind of density. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to do that kind of analysis, but that could be a secondary solution, if it doesn't work at its face town-wide, take it out for now and go back in and fix it and work with what they gave you and try to figure out where it could apply, because it's a tool. I think it has its function, but I think the changes have somewhat limited its usefulness because of the point that you've raised, Mike.
Yeah, totally agree. I am concerned about how my town council is going to respond to this. Our inclusionary zoning ordinance in town needs updating, but with these sort of parameters, it may not pass muster. So I think that's something that every community has to give some consideration to. Thank you.
Actually, Mike, my question was based on the comprehensive permit template, not inclusionary zoning. We don't have that here, so we're lucky.
Okay, sorry, Al.
Oh, no. I do want to say to the group, Ashley, you made a statement in one of our APA meetings regarding the new legislation that every time you read through the legislation, you find something new. And that keeps coming to my head every time I read legislation and find something new. You are spot on with that comment. It's every time I keep reading it, I find something new. So you were spot on with that comment.
Yeah, I think, what we've discovered in drafting the templates was that when you take the enabling legislation and you try to make it into local regulation, that is where it begins to highlight, where things don't align quite right. And so, I've been keeping track. I know Kelly has been keeping track. If you guys are also finding things, I'm collecting comments to bring, back to the General Assembly to say, these are the things that we've noticed. These are the things that I think, we think need some attention. And APA is certainly, working on that. We've been talking to the league about how we can bring that forward in a constructive way. Also talking with Rhode Island Housing about that. So we're hoping to pull together kind of a unified approach, where we can all say, these are the things that have risen to the surface through this process that we really think need to get addressed. So please, let us know if you have your own list, strength in numbers. So I know Diane put a question in the chat. If a planning board already has a TRC with the different composition of the TRC per the state law, can this still be a planning board established committee, or does it need to be appointed by the town council? So we've definitely had this conversation because the language was intentionally changed to strike the word planning board and insert the word municipality. The conservative reading of that is that that's no longer your planning board, that's now your town council. Definitely talk to your solicitor, but I do think that there's some opportunity there to enable in zoning, through the town council, since they are the body that adopts and modifies zoning, and then send them to your regulations for the specific information on the technical review committee. I think it's up to your solicitor whether or not they're comfortable allowing the town council to delegate appointing authority to the planning board. That, you could do it that way. But you definitely want to check with your solicitor and make sure that they're comfortable with that approach if you want to retain appointing authority through the planning board, but there was an intentional change there from planning board to municipality.
Okay, I think we have addressed all the questions and we're just shy of the hour. So I will thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Rhode Island Housing, and thank you, Ashley, for some informative discussion. And I believe that everyone has contact information. If not, for our speakers today, please just send me an email and I will put you in contact. My email is jslattery, SLATTERY, @rileague.org. So
And
thank
I'm gonna put my email in the chat. I'm happy to answer after we get off the call. Please feel free to reach out.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Ashley. And thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.